Hello everyone, this is the tiny Whoov from WolfHoo. Before we get into driving this around and all the fun to be had, let's go over a few things so that you understand that this is, one, so this is a kit, and two, there's a little bit of a unique operation here. You may remember some time ago we covered this machine, which is also kind of a Whover as they're called, and this one's made by Eachine, like the TW65 something or other. But this worked just fine. One of the things that I commented about this one was that driving it was a little bit wonky because it still had the traditional quad sort of setup. So this thing comes as a kit, like I said, and you do have to cut out the different hoops to assemble them, and there is a very good video on their own website that shows you how to put it together. There is one piece I'm a bit confused about. This thing, it's supposed to go across the bottom, and I think because of the material it should actually help in cases where you're trying to drive it around on carpet, but I couldn't keep it on this. It kept coming off. You might be able to hot glue this on, but then again it gets lumpy, so that might not work great. They may also change this at a later time to make it adhere a little better to the foam. Something else to note is the camera does not come with the kit. You do get the camera mount, but not the camera itself, nor do you get the power lead that I've fashioned here for FPV purposes. You may find connecting the FPV camera a little bit confusing. As you can see right down in there, hopefully right down in there, there is a 3-pin connector, and the forwardmost pin is positive or voltage, and the next pin or middle pin is the ground. So I just fashioned a little lead to plug in down there, and I used some needle nose pliers to press it down in there. Got it the first try. I'll show you a picture here from the Tiny Who website of that pin connector, and that's kind of a nice thing because they've obviously made this cutout exactly for that. You'll need to route your wires a little bit differently if you plan to use the longer stick batteries and you have an FPV camera, but as I showed you, it's not that big a deal. You just maybe relocate this lead from this side over to this side, use some of this cloth tape. That's Tessa tape that I've used there, or some people call it hockey tape. It seems to stick pretty well to this foam. I've used it here on the bottom, as we saw previously as well. Of course, you don't have to FPV this. You can have a completely good time with line of sight driving and basically cleaning your floors as you're going around as well. And then something else that's worth noting is the Eachine one, I believe that came in around $50. This one has a kit, and the cost range goes from $29.99 to $35.99, so quite a bit less, and it's actually, in my opinion, a much better looking design. So in the assembly, and I won't go over this in great detail, but there are a few things to note. Here on the bottom, note that the wires and the coordination of those wires to where they plug in so that you get the proper rotation, and then also note the props, the high side, they still spin in on the front motors like a traditional quad, and they spin in on the rear motors like a traditional quad as well. You do see some hot glue. That is part of their recommended installation. It does come with the battery that you see here. It's a 1S battery, 300 milliamp, and it does come with the PH2 connector. It just holds pretty well just right in there, but as you'll note in their installation video, they talk about using another piece of the spare foam and putting it across the top. You have all sorts of spare foam, so there's nothing to worry about as far as needing to fashion something there. But also, if you do that, you do need to create some slack space for this battery. As far as batteries go, you might also notice this cutout. You can use other batteries like the typical tiny hoop batteries, something like this. This is a G&B 260 high volt, and it does slide in there quite nicely. It doesn't go great because of where I got my wires, but you can see that little cutout there, and if you had a piece over the top, it would stay even better. Also, the Beta FPV 300 milliamp battery does also fit in there just fine. It's a little bit tighter on the wedging, but of course it's foam and it's very forgiving. Now you'll note on their website they talk about how it's flashed with a special firmware, and I think that's part of some of the magic as far as the enjoyment goes and making it easy to drive this thing around. Previously, you know, you'd tend to yaw this with the Eachine one, and it would really swing around kind of odd. But the controller, this side is actually quite firm, quite tight, so this doesn't move around freely like you would normally expect in a controller. But this one moves much more smoothly, and it's a much easier movement getting to all the different directions. Essentially, in the running of this, you power this on with your battery, you turn your remote on, it makes a couple of beeps, and then you hit this button right up here, and that starts all the motors spinning. You give it some throttle up, that raises it up off the ground a little bit. It also dictates the speed at which you're going to be driving, and then you really just drive it with the left and the right on this stick. You can back up. What I do to back up, because you can topple this over if you back up with too much throttle, is I lower the throttle all the way down and then I'll back up. And you'll see that in the footage that we're going to show here. I've also got some FPV footage from the camera, and we'll get to take a look at that. If you're not familiar with the channel, we recently had all our flooring done, so it's nice and smooth. If you remember that original review from the Eachine branded Whover, that it was quite bumpy, and I'm glad to say that the people who did the floors did a real nice job, so it's much more smooth now. And we're still without furniture because we're allowing the hardwood floors to cure. So I have a nice big open space to go drive this in. And something else, my 8-year-old has been driving this on a daily basis, and sometimes more than one. I showed her where I keep my batteries so that she knows how to plug them in, and she has had no trouble operating this in any fashion. So if you have a young person in your life that you'd like to get involved in this hobby, this might be a really good candidate, because it is very hardy, very robust, and drives pretty easily, really. Like I said, just to give it some throttle, then they don't have to mess with this stick really until they hit something that they can't get out, and then you just drive it around. And the last thing you do is, of course, if you want to stop, you hit this button. Something else is it does have low voltage cutoff. The batteries tend to come in around 3.2 to 3.3 volts when the low voltage cutoff kicks in, and when that does, it just stops spinning the motor, so then you're stopped in place and it's time for a new battery. I really don't have any building tricks, just assemble it like they show you. I did one thing that they do show, and that is to tuck the antenna up under here, and then I used a little bit of tape. Originally I had the motor wires tucked underneath this section, which this is sticky back here, but you can see it has gotten quite dirty, and so that adhesion kind of loses itself. So I used a little piece of tape to kind of stick all the motor wires together here on the bottom, keep them up off the floor from dragging. This piece right here is probably optional, but I decided to go ahead and use it just to firm up this area so I get more true response possibly. I don't know that you'll have any really difference in how it drives with or without this piece. The only other thing I can say to pay attention to is when you do put this in, make sure that you get these motor wires bent well over, not the motor wires, the battery leads get bent right over. That way they don't rub on the ground. You don't want those sticking down because that is silicone based wire. This lead is also reversely polarized. You may find in other revisions later on that this early revision, it's got a cable like this. Don't worry about it too much. They actually cover that in their build video as well. Plug the lead in like it's supposed to, lined up with the slot, and it will be just fine. You might be able to see right down there where it says B+, but yet we have a black wire. Yeah, that's the manufacturing mishap that they had with their little leads that they got. But, you know, as long as it works, we can live with that, right? Let's go ahead and get started. This is just a little bit of footage of me driving it around, and it drives a lot like you might expect. If you're expecting a powerboat or an airboat, that they kind of swing around. They don't stop on a dime. It doesn't have any braking purposes. There's no wheels. There's nothing. No part of the powertrain is actually touching the floor. So when you're driving it, you do have to kind of swing the back end around and predict that. Sometimes with the driving of it, it can feel a little bit jerky, and that's typically me or my daughter on the sticks. We're just a little bit less than smooth, and you'll also note that I do get some smoother turns and rotations, and it's just a matter of that fine motor control and getting used to the spring tension on the remote. I do find that you can drive this for a little over 7 minutes on the stock battery, and that's pretty dang good. I was really surprised by that, because typically when we're flying these things, we only get about 2.5 minutes. But this came in at almost 7 minutes, so more than double, almost triple that. If you're concerned about replacement parts, it does also come with a wide variety of replacement parts. You can actually just buy the frame, which is the foam pieces. If you already have a ducted Inductrix or tiny hoop of some sort that you're kind of done with because the frame's all broken up, you can cut those ducts out and then you can place it in this machine. You can also get a spare controller. If your controller gets dropped, you can get spare motors. You can get a spare flight controller. The range is pretty good. I can't say that I actually tested the range extensively, because as you'll see in the FPV footage, I do fly it around, or I do drive it around the main floor, and I don't think this is something that you would do a long ways away. This isn't really an outdoor type of machine. It's really an indoor, in-home, maybe in a gym, or if you had a warehouse or a factory floor that was real nice and smooth, it would probably do quite well. Of course, a laminated floor, and I think you can do this on carpet too, but it's going to have to be a very low profile carpet, and you might find that performance is a bit muted because of the friction, but of course you can also try to give it more throttle to overcome that. So as I said, previously, my 8-year-old, she has the one of 3 kids that has become interested in RC, and this is her favorite. She likes to get this out, and she feels very confident, and she actually enjoys it quite a bit, and it's a pretty good time just watching her enjoy driving this around the house and having a good time. And she asks me every day if the batteries are charged, and I'm sure that every night after I put her to bed, I have at least a couple of batteries charged waiting for her, because she either likes to drive it in the mornings after she gets done with her breakfast and making her lunch, and or she comes home after school, and it's one of the first things she's looking to do, at least as far as I'm told by Grandma, who watches the kids after work. I really like doing this straight line runs with the grain of the floors, and just going as straight as I can with that grain. I don't know, it's just something about that feeling of being so low in FPV and going fast, or what's perceived as fast. And I had a good time. You can do tricks with this. I've tried every once in a while doing kind of a pirouette and just kind of doing a 360 and then heading in the same direction I was already headed. I do think you can learn to do some other things. If you do more throttle manipulation, you can probably reduce the throttle as you go into a turn and maybe do a 720 or something of that nature. If you have some mylar or other slick firm surfaces, you could probably make some small ramps to have some additional fun with. My 8-year-old also told me that unfortunately the basement door was left open one day, and she drove it right off the edge of the steps to the basement, and it went. She said it went flying down. I suspect there was a fair bit of tumbling that happened as well, but as you've seen on the desk already, it has survived her use, it has survived my use, and I think it would be a hardy little machine to have some indoor fun this winter with. For many people, many different backgrounds. So WolfHoo, I think you did a good job. I think the custom firmware that you got on the flight controller, your price point, I think all those things are real in line. I think if you're interested in anything like this, that you should definitely head over to their site. Check it out. You can get just the frame between $11 and $12.99. You can also get the flight controller as an individual piece for $10.99, as I'm rating them now off their website. Of course, the full kit comes from a price point between $29.99 and $35.99. And the price point varies depending upon how many batteries you buy. You can just get 1 battery, or you can get 3 batteries. So it depends on if you have batteries already to use. You don't necessarily have to buy all the different batteries that they offer. At minimum, you will order 1 kit with 1 battery. The difference price on just the frame is without or with the slip pad, and the slip pad, I believe, is that part that I showed you that has the it's kind of a slicker material, but it just didn't stay on very well. And maybe there was something that I did wrong. Maybe I've got the wrong piece out. Maybe the black part here is the backing, and the other part was the part I was supposed to stick down. I don't think so, but that's always possible. You know, I kind of reserve the right to always be wrong, as I do in my household as well. One thing I failed to mention is another area you could probably drive this around on is if you have a garage floor. So you can pull the cars out of the garage and you can drive it around on the floor there. I think most kitchens, at least in the U.S., have a laminate floor. So if you like this and you're thinking about your flying space, you should be able to drive it around in your kitchen at the very least. Like I said, I think it will do fine on low pile or real short carpet. Of course, gyms, armories, large cement floors will be a lot of fun. One thing I'm unsure about is what happens if you have multiples of these, and do you have any sort of RC link control issues? Of course, with FPV, we have to make sure we stay off of each other's channels, but I suspect it would work out quite well. I'm guessing from my days of using toys, controllers like this, that you could probably do multiple at the same time. You just need to power on and wait for them to bind in all different times, so you're not trying to all power on your Whover and your controller at the same time. And for all your buddies that are out flying, so just do one, get it bound up, ready to go, then do the next. I think that would make it safe so you don't have control link issues. So if you can't tell, I'm pretty pleased. It's a pretty fun thing, and I'm really happy that my 8-year-old enjoys it. I've been trying to get the kids involved in this hobby. I've been doing this video stuff for 2.5 years or something like that. My 2 oldest kids just aren't interested. Some they'll watch, they'll come out back every once in a while, put some goggles on or something, and come watch me fly. As far as the family enjoyment now, I've at least got one person who's a little bit excited. If you have any comments, questions, suggestions, or otherwise, please let me know in that section down below. I appreciate your time, and thanks for watching. What do you think? Is it a keeper? Should we keep this one?